So hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here. My name is Taya Jeanette, and I am producing this session. My pronouns are she and they. I have brown hair, pale skin, and I'm wearing a black shirt. We want this to be a really interactive session, so please ask questions in the chat and in the Q&A, and we will have time for a Q&A at the end of the session. And without further ado, I will let Ellie and Michael introduce themselves and get started.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ellie Johnston. I have brown hair, pale skin, and I'm wearing a sweater because it's finally getting cool where I am here in Asheville, North Carolina.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Ellie and Taya. My name is Michael Kaliski, he, him, and I have brown hair and pale skin. I'm wearing a light plaid because it's a beautiful day in New York. I'm out here working on Global Citizen Live, primarily based in Los Angeles, though.
Great, and I'll say a little bit more about what I do too. So I'm the climate and energy lead at this organization, Climate Interactive. And what we do is we develop tools to help people see what works when it comes to addressing climate change. We'll be diving into one of our tools that we've developed called NRoads in just a moment. And with me to co-host will be Michael. And Michael, you want to say a little bit about what you do?
Yes. So originally come from film, television production. I worked at the studios, had a production and management company geared towards humanitarian environmental issues. And about 11 years ago, I had an epiphany that while important to make these films, generally we're preaching to the choir. So I had this idea for good planet innovation to integrate sustainable and ethical products and behaviors and messaging into mainstream films, TV shows. And immediately after we launched, we got asked to start making production sustainable. So, and of course, we've evolved that into making them more regenerative whenever possible. And that's what we're doing today: film, TV, advertising, and large events like the one we're doing now in New York.
Cool. All right. And I'm also curious where you all who are listening in are coming from. And one way we're going to make this interactive is by using this platform called Poll Everywhere. I'm going to share my screen here. And in the chat, I've posted the link. I think it's pinned. But if you go to pollev.com/climateinter935 and tell us where you are today. Are most of you all coming from the LA, California area, or do we have people coming from other parts? I see one pin that popped in there, somebody there coming in from New York. Awesome. Feel free to fill in. Okay, we've got the Bay Area of California, LA, lots of people there on the West Coast, and somebody out there in, what is that? Is that Bangladesh, perhaps? New York, Northeast area. Okay, do we have anybody in the Midwest? We've got the coasts well covered. I'm glad I can hold down the Southeastern United States here. It's great to have you all here, and we'll be coming back to the poll to get your input here in just a minute. But let me give you some background on what we're about to do. So we are going to be using this tool called NRoads that my team at Climate Interactive developed with the MIT Sloan School of Management. This is a simulation model used to test climate solutions and generate climate scenarios for the future. So for this session, we're going to be really taking a look at climate change from the global level. Like what is the mix of all the different climate solutions out there? Which ones have the biggest amount of leverage? And we're going to explore that dynamically. The way this session will work is we're going to together co-create a global path of action to achieve our global climate goals. And along the way, keep in mind two key questions that I have for us is one, as we talk about different kinds of climate solutions, it's really important for us to think about who will be impacted by these actions, who will benefit from them, and who might be harmed by them. And then alongside that, what is the role of the entertainment industry in these different types of climate solutions? So the context for our goal today is this global goal that was agreed upon in the Paris Climate Agreement back in 2015 in the climate negotiations process. Pretty much every single country in the entire world came together, signed the Paris Agreement, and said, we want to limit warming to well below 2 degrees and aim for this goal of 1.5. There's really our line in the sand of that upper threshold through which we want to let climate change happen. So to get things started, I'll go back to the poll. I want you all who are listening in, weigh in. What is an action that's been enacted recently that you've heard about, that you've been a part of, that you've initiated, that you think will be positive for the climate? And what I'm going to do, we'll go to the poll, and I want to get my screen's going here. And give me 1 second. All right, there we go. And what I'm going to do as I get your responses in is I'm going to jot a few of the top ones that come in down, and then we're going to test them within En-Roads and say, what if the whole world did a similar kind of action? So just throw out some ideas. Maybe it's something that you read about in the news recently. This week is UN Climate Week. So there have actually been a number of different big announcements coming from world leaders in terms of actions on climate. Can you all see those responses? Here we go. Somebody is proposing moving toward electric cars in California by 2035. Absolutely. That's a big announcement. We're seeing more of that. Solar training programs, more dense housing in California, denser development. China is pledging to end overseas coal investment. This was an announcement just made this week. It's kind of big news, as China was one of the last big countries financing coal, banning gas. So coal, gas. Plaintiffs like Youth versus Government are amping up pressure to governments, private corporations, and in other countries. The courts are already ruling in favor of climate justice. Absolutely. This summit, totally. Perfect. All right. Well, this gives us a great place to start of a few different types of action out there. And then we see fossil-free finance, the proposed Fossil-Free Financing Act, getting the federal bank to force banks to stop funding new fossil fuel infrastructure. Great. And then, yes, somebody else mentioning, again, China's cessation of building coal-fired power plants. Great. Well, this gives us a good foundation to start from and to think about some of these different domains in which there is activity around climate action. So what we're looking at here is En-Roads. This is this global climate simulator. On the left, we're looking at global sources of primary energy from the year 2000 to 2100. On the bottom is coal. Then in red, we have oil. Blue is showing gas. Green is renewables. This pink line at the top, that's bioenergy. And the thin blue line that you can really hardly see is nuclear. And then several of these types of energy sources, of course, namely the fossil fuels, are big contributors to global greenhouse gas emissions. They release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. This, as well as the other sources of greenhouse gas, leads to this kind of steady rise if we're not taking further action from where we are today. This is what we call our baseline scenario. And by the end of the century, this is expected to get us to 3.6. So this is our kind of doomsday scenario in terms, I mean, it could get even worse than this. Absolutely, it could be much worse. But this is absolutely where we do not want to go. You think about the impacts we've already seen just in the last few months. I know many of you all said you're in California. Of course, top of mind, I'm sure, has been the wildfires that have just devastated parts of this year out there. And other places, the hurricanes and flooding and other kinds of climate impacts have been felt here today when we're at about 1 degree of warming so far in degrees Celsius. So 3.6, we absolutely want to avoid it. We want to keep climate change to 1.5 or less. the first action that I heard mentioned was electric vehicles. Somebody was mentioning California's policy of going towards all electric cars by 2035. So here within the control panel of NRoads, we have all of these different sliders where we can take action. And as we go through some of these different types of policies, I'm going to turn to Michael, and he's going to discuss some of the ways in which this also ties back to the role that the entertainment industry plays when it comes to all of these different kinds of ways we think about tackling climate change. So we're going to be juggling between this big picture global level and then the role of the entertainment sector specifically. So hang on, because it'll be a ride. So first off, electric transportation. This is this slider here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it to its maximum level and say, okay, what if by the year 2040, every type of car, truck, train, moped, scooter out there was running on electric rather than oil. It would be running on all of the different sources of electric energy that we have, running off of our grid. And think to yourself, we haven't done anything else. What kind of impact do you think that will make in terms of temperature change? And I'm going to move this slider, and you'll see how NRoads works. So as we ramp up electrification, you see that number changed. Our line here from greenhouse gas net emissions went down some. And then if we look really carefully over here on the left, we can see our energy mix shifting. So one of the things I want to draw your attention to is what's changing. And I'm going to hit replay several times so we can see this. This red wedge here, oil. No surprise, it's getting smaller. We're less dependent on the internal combustion engine to get around. We're running on all of these electric vehicles. We don't need as much oil. But some of the other things that are also happening, check out coal here. So it's going up slightly. And what's happening, and also gas here also increasing some. These are outcomes that we actually don't want to see. But what we're doing in a world where we haven't taken any other kind of action, we're just electrifying the transport sector. We're just drawing from whatever mix of energy is providing energy to the electrical grid. And in this case, it's got some fossil fuels in it. So the impact of that electrification right now is not as much as it would be if we without the kind of complementary policies that we'll explore next when we talk about how those different energy sources like coal, what to do about gas and renewable energy. But Michael, how are you thinking about electric vehicles and what role they play?
Yeah, well, they are not as broadly available as we want them to be in this moment, but they are available increasingly. Everything from the vehicles that crew drives to set, if there's not public transportation options, to production vehicles, to the production trailers and talent trailers, wardrobe trailers, running off of solar or electric rather than running diesel generators all day. And I know this isn't transportation, but solar electric generators, increasing those. There are a few vendors who have those available now. And it's partly a matter right in this moment of allotting the right budget for the electrification of the transportation and generators. One thing that I think is going to be tricky, though, is one of the biggest carbon footprint pieces of any production is flights. So when you have talent or producers or anybody flying to locations for distant locations, that's really a tough one, because I don't think we'll have electric planes soon enough.
Yeah, that's a great point. And when I moved this slider and set electrification here, I'm going to click on this 3 dots here. What we're doing is we're electrifying all of the transit on our land. There is, for those optimists out there, we can test what that additional 15% of our transportation sector that is covered by airplanes and also water. So thinking about cargo, when you're big shipping containers going across the ocean, you can't plug them in. You're not going to have batteries that are going to be big enough to power a big shipping cargo ship across the ocean. So that's certainly an area for more kind of technological adoption and engineering, and is definitely something where, you know, at the end of the day, how can we just reduce our dependence on that? So thanks there. The next thing that came up was solar and different solar training programs. So when we have this industry around renewable energy is growing really fast, and part of that really entails a lot of job training programs. How can we make sure that the companies who want to grow fast and have the ability to have the workforce to do it? And so alongside that comes different kinds of government programs. Here within the United States, there's a lot of discussion at the federal level around what that could look like, currently in Congress. But what if we just subsidize renewable energy further than it has been? So you can see it's growing pretty fast, but I'm going to subsidize it, and think to yourself, what impact do you think a further subsidy in renewable energy might have? And we'll see here this growing even further. I'll replay the change. So we go from 3.5 down to 3.3 degrees. And that wedge for solar and also wind, we're really thinking about those two as taking off together. There are, of course, other renewable energy technologies out there, geothermal, tidal power, things like that, that may play some role in some specific settings, but really where we expect all the growth is in solar and wind. And Michael, you were kind of talking about and going there to where you're seeing some of that solar getting put to use already in production.
Yeah, so a lot of the studios have installed solar onto their sound stages, and I think there's still more to go there because they're still using more energy than they're getting from the sun. And then these mobile solar generator units, those are great for location shoots. Production companies that own their buildings can either add solar, or if they don't own their buildings, they can talk to the landlords about switching to a green energy plan. Or if solar is not possible because of, for whatever reason, they can switch to green energy plans. Those are available in most cities.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, with so much being out there in California, there are so many things that the state of California is doing to really try and drive things forward in terms of use of solar and incentives there. The next thing I saw someone write in was denser housing, which I thought was a really interesting one, because we think of so many different climate challenges are totally linked to really other critical challenges we face, access to housing. And so when we think about, well, what is the benefit of when you do denser development? And to my mind, where I go is in terms of the energy efficiency, and because and particularly in the transport sector, not even so much in buildings and industry, although you could have some benefits to the energy efficiency of keeping buildings close together. Certainly, apartment building has some energy efficiency benefits over lots of single family homes. But also, if you have denser development, then you can reduce those commutes. People can get to work, they can do the same job that they might otherwise, but they can live closer to that work. And in addition to that, of course, we have more people working from home when that's possible. But of course, you got to drive to the set. You've got to drive to the production studio. You can't do that all at home. So what if we increase transport energy efficiency just a bit to reflect that kind of denser development that would shorten commutes there? And Michael, did you have anything you wanted to jump in there?
Yeah, I mean, this is more of a stretch in some ways, but I think that as far as like how the entertainment industry fits this, but what we can look at is the locations we choose. So, choosing locations that are near your production hub, where the majority of your resources are, will reduce that transportation and will create sort of that, an analog for that density that you're talking about. And one of the technologies that is out there that they use on the Mandalorian is these XR stages, where you don't have to fly to New Zealand to get this amazing landscape. You can actually shoot it on a stage where a majority of the entertainment professionals are, and get a equal, if not even better, result sometimes. But definitely a massive cut of the energy expended to get to that location. Yeah,
that's a great point. Then the next thing that was mentioned over in the poll everywhere, a couple of people were mentioning this big announcement from China to stop financing new coal-fired power plants abroad. I think many analysts are looking to where the details are, but this sounds really big. It sounds really huge, as China's been one of the last kind of holdouts in terms of funding coal-fired power plants in other countries. And we see this down here, this bottom area, shaded area. This is coal. So what if we reduce that? And so I'm going to go under and say, okay, well, what if this, this sign from China is a sign of the times, and it's just signaling that we're going to stop building coal infrastructure. So we can take sort of a more dramatic slider change here. And I'm going to say, what if we stopped building new coal infrastructure by the year 2025 entirely? What impact, again, think about it, we're at 3.2. What do you think just killing coal, canceling coal might have in terms of our climate impact? I'm going to turn this on, and we can see here, okay, by the end of the century, we're not using any coal at all. And that was a pretty dramatic. We went from 3.2 down to 2.9. You see that it takes a while to entirely phase coal out of our energy mix. Something that's going on there is that when you stop building new coal, that doesn't mean you stop using the coal that's already there. So power plants in general, they're built and they last about on average 30 years. So when we stop building new coal infrastructure, those power plants are slowly getting retired and phased out there. But that does have some impact there. And so if what we're seeing from China plays out everywhere else, that could then have rippling effects that could really set us up for seeing this scenario become a reality. Michael, any thoughts there?
Well, it's similar to the renewables conversation. I mean, finding, I think one of the things in a recent poll of producers, some colleagues of mine and I did, most didn't know at all about their energy plan. And once they looked into it, they saw that they could switch to, a renewable energy plan and get off the coal. And that goes also, it links back to the electrification of vehicles. If your vehicle is being charged by energy from a coal-fired plant, it's not that green. So being really aware of where you're getting your energy on the road as well, to electrify for your electric vehicles is a really wise thing to do. And I wanted to throw something else in here too. Like, in addition to the physical production bits, we're all creatives. We're creating stories. We're telling stories, and putting these concepts on screen. Not in a necessarily preachy way, but just having the aspirational characters in movies driving electric vehicles and using reusables and behaving in these ways that are aspirational for a clean planet. That is a really important thing and powerful thing that we can do as filmmakers. So I just want to throw that in there too, because that's another factor here. It's hard to show not using clean or coal-fired plants on screen, but maybe there's some way to do that. But definitely electric vehicles is one that we've discussed that you could show.
Yeah, I love that point. And it's like, perhaps as we phased, cigarette smoking and tried to make it less of a socially acceptable thing, how do you phase out something like the kind of fossil fuel culture that we sometimes celebrate, particularly in kind of American culture of like where the race cars are electric or something like that.
And people have jobs, like somebody, like if you see a movie about these working class family, they could be, they could work on a solar farm, or, instead of the greasy spoon diner, a vegan restaurant, and it doesn't have to be hippy dippy. It could be like really kind of a cool, gritty little dive place in Brooklyn that's serving, plant-based food. It could be anything like that. And keeping that in mind when writing and developing stories is all of these factors can be integrated in some ways.
Yeah, totally. The other thing that came up in our initial poll was around gas, and particularly phasing out gas stoves. So we use gas in lots of different ways. It is a source of electricity. We have big gas-fired power generation facilities that are powering our electrical grid. But then a lot of homes are dependent on gas for cooking, and then also for heating. A lot of furnaces and single-family homes and furnaces in bigger buildings powered by gas. So that transition away from that, and that can look like two different things. One is around, what are the ways in which we limit gas? So we could say tax gas to make it more expensive. That might disincentivize people from using it. And also, I want to circle back to electrification, because when we think about things like our homes that have heating and cooking provided by gas, electrification is a key piece there. But first, what if we just had somewhat of a moderate tax on, I'll do highly taxed natural gas. Let's see, that makes some impact. That tax wasn't that high. And then in addition to that, what about really driving forward all of those different programs that might dissuade people from putting gas in new construction and that kind of thing? So we have further electrification of our buildings and industrial sector. So this is now going well beyond just thinking about cars, but what are all of the ways in which we might electrify everything? So this comes down to not only kind of homes, and things like hot water heaters can oftentimes be powered by gas. They're often electric, but then also thinking about those industrial processes, manufacturing, what are those supply chains looking like? And gas is used in furnaces to produce things like concrete and materials that are very difficult to make otherwise. Things like iron require high heat industrial furnaces that are driven by both coal and gas. And we'll have to figure out ways to electrify that to really transition away. And Michael, you were mentioning too around kind of the trailers and those buildings where it's like, okay, when you've got a production set and you've got generators that might be running on oil, how can we switch off of that? Any examples there that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, like there's the Verde trailer, which has solar panels, and those I think run their, when they're parked, they're running off solar. I'm pretty sure they're 100% solar when they're parked, and they're always making improvements on that. There's but for the most part, productions are using diesel generators, and we got to get off of that. Most older studios have hot water heaters. Some of them are switching those out. I think that's a process that just has to be updated for older studios, and any new studio that's being built should avoid gas altogether.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as you're talking about these like trailers that might be solar power generated, I'm thinking to some of the calls I saw coming from people in Louisiana that were impacted by Hurricane Ida most recently, where they were desperately looking for those solar powered generators and saying, the fossil fuels are failing us. They built a natural gas facility. They said it was going to weather the hurricanes, and it didn't. Like, bring us a solar generator. And so one thing that I'm thinking about, I don't know if this is happening, you can tell me, is when you're done with the production, where are those things taken? Are they heading to the landfill, or how do things get reused, and can they get repurposed in ways that can then go to those most impacted? can that solar trailer serve somebody in need of whatever it may be? That would be really cool to see.
Yeah, most of this stuff is rented. But if you're building a set, you know, the legacy thinking around that is they just get a big construction dumpster, smash it up, and throw it away. Where you know, us sustainability consultants are all about reusing these materials and donating to local schools, theater companies, other productions, finding ways to reuse these materials and give them back to the community. Habitat for Humanity is a great place as well to take some of these materials. So if they were ever building a set that had solar panels, then I think like Habitat for Humanity would be a place you'd want to send that.
Yeah, cool. And while we're on this topic too of thinking about waste and what might be done there, going back to thinking about like, okay, what is the role that waste plays in the climate picture in terms of emissions? And we capture this within NRoads under this category of methane and other. So one thing that I'm sure comes across some of your minds as you're thinking about what should we do on climate is around diets and our food choices. But then we also think about the waste side. So when a lot of stuff goes into landfill, particularly those things that are coming from different sources of biomass that have been grown, wood, whatever, food, as they break down and decompose, they're releasing methane emissions into the atmosphere unless they're otherwise being captured. So figuring out how we can reduce the amount of things going into the landfill and figuring out what to do with that stuff that we can avoid, you know, throwing out is a really important piece. And if we combine that and thinking too about what are those agricultural practices that we might adopt to make sure that perhaps we're less dependent on cows in particular because they're a big source of methane emissions. More people around the world might be adopting plant-based diets. And also just figuring out ways of raising animals in ways that doesn't generate so many emissions. We can reduce this sector quite substantially. So I'll move this slider here down and we'll see the impact of, say, of reducing our agricultural and waste emissions. So let me replay that change. We were at 2.6, now we're down to 2.4, taking massive amounts of action around waste, and then also food. And I'm curious, Michael, I'm sure food comes up a lot as in your work.
Oh yeah, this is a big one. So, you know, companies like Good Planet, Earth Angel, EcoSet, we have been for many years integrating composting on set, and about 70% of what crew creates outside of like art department is generally compost. You know, depends on how many reusables versus compostables you're using, but it's basically a big piece. And when compostable things, whether it's food or compostable materials, goes to landfill, they break down into methane, as you mentioned, and which is, you know, several times more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon. It doesn't last as long, but it does a lot of damage in the short term. And so switching either personally or for entire production to plant-based food options is one of the big things you can do in addition to composting, having a really solid composting program. And again, this is a great opportunity to affect you know, global culture by integrating composting and plant-based diets into on-screen narratives.
I love where this conversation is going, and thank you guys so much for this. I do want to open up a little bit. We have 3 people who have asked to share their audio, and anyone else who wants to share audio and video, you can do that now. But I do want to open up to just be a little interactive with some of our attendees. And I see Adil from Sierra Club has been waiting patiently from the start, so I'm just going to bring him up now.
Hey everyone, this is really cool. Thanks for demonstrating all this. So I had a question about like which one of these factors do you think like which are like kind of tied together and in the real world would like both go down at the same time?
Good question. So like in terms of which types of interventions are complementary?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the one that that comes to mind most immediately that we were touching on earlier is around electrification. You know, you electrify cars and you don't take any other kind of action, those cars are going to be pulling from the existing electrical grid, which may be dominated by fossil fuels. And if nothing else is done, it could lead to more fossil fuel use. Obviously, that's not how it's playing out in the real world. We're seeing a lot of growth in renewable energy, but we get that benefit from renewable energy even more so when we have the electrification to complement it. So, you know, because I can't power my car on wind unless I can plug it in. We're not going to be able to put wind turbines, you know, and have them power the cars themselves. So that's the one that comes to mind most immediately.
Yeah, and one that pops to my mind is going plant-based is directly linked to deforestation.
Yeah,
massive amounts of land is used in a really awful way for these large animal agriculture, you know, factory farms, and so, you know, they're deforesting, you know, the Amazon at like a rapid rate, largely because of animal agriculture.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm so glad you brought that up. And so when we are talking here about reducing these methane and other emissions, I want to also, you know, a big driver of deforestation is that need for food. So what if we reduce deforestation alongside it? Another thing that's complementary when we think about improving our food systems is also energy efficiency, reducing that supply chain. You know, if we're drinking water that's coming from our, you know, some island on the other side of the world, how can we just maybe drink water locally or eat apples from closer by? So also energy efficiency plays into that as well. Great points.
Cool. I had one other question, which was that if we do everything right, does this model go into like negative emissions? Like, would the temperature increase be negative, basically?
That's a great question. I'm not going to actually give it away. Well, we can't go into negative temperature, at least in terms of this time horizon of 2100. It's a big challenge to get to 1.5. But what I can do, let's see if I can share this screen and navigate my way back to Hopin and share the scenario that we've made so far. And maybe somebody else too can bring up the question that they were bringing in. And if you want, you can then play with this and move it even further too.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Adil, you can feel free to stay up here or leave if you'd like, either way. If you don't know how to leave, it's the top right leave button. You won't leave the actual event. You'll just turn off your video.
I'll go on mute because I have one other question, so I'll wait for others to ask questions.
Awesome. I'm going to bring up Christina Page, who I believe is also with Climate Interactive. Hi, Christina.
Great event, Ellie.
Thanks. Chris Page, she works on our team on our business partnerships. So particularly if any of you are with large production companies or that kind of thing, we are happy to connect and think about how this tool could be used in all different kinds of settings, whether it's staff training or more. And Christina is our person for that. Was there somebody else out there?
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to bring up Anya as well. And I think that's everyone in our request right now. So if anyone else in the chat would like to request sharing your video and audio, go ahead right now.
Hi, everyone. This is so great. I was just wondering if you could respond, if you have any ideas on like how does that translate in narrative that we, because on the chat there was so many. I love that Chanda recommended the Mate affair and Syriana, which, I mean, those are movies before I was born, and I have to like go back a long time. So it might be time for a remake. But like, what are some other topics? Because population is a very taboo topic too in many ways, because we already have the science and projections on how is the human growth going to be in the next decade, and and that also something that is interesting to analyze in narrative so people can understand what's coming. Or deforestation. What are some of the topics that you see could be translated into narrative?
Yeah, Michael, do you have any initial thoughts there, or I could jump in?
Yeah. Well, I mean, really, I mean, we're a creative industry. We could look at any of these things and integrate them. Just looking at all of these, the various energy supplies can be built into the narratives. As we talked about earlier, you could have people who are working on a project, or who, and it might not be, the movie's not necessarily about that. Like sometimes these mainstream stories, they're really it's really great to integrate this subtly in there so that people get educated about them that way. I mean, population's a thorny one, because some groups of people blame population, and when they do that, it's a way of taking aim at people of color in developing countries, which is what they're like, those guys are doing it, like, and it's not, it's a lot of like the pollution created by China is because of Western demand for the products that they're creating, cheap products. And what we're seeing in broad trends, and I'm not an expert on this by any means, but what I've been reading about this is that overall the population trends are flattening out, so that they'll probably plateau a bit. We're not just exploding, exponentially. So Western countries are slowing down, and developing countries are still growing, but it's gonna balance out. It's about the lifestyles. It's about how corporations are behaving in the world, and how individuals are behaving in the world, and they're behaving in a way that's not sustainable for much longer. So that's so yeah, building all that in there is great. Some of the carbon removal technology is really exciting. Iceland just put something online that's pulling out a lot of carbon out of the air, just went online. So finding ways to integrate that, especially in science fiction. I think science fiction is a really exciting place to talk about future technologies.
Yeah, those are great points. I totally agree. Yeah, we haven't touched on this piece of carbon removal yet. And everything we've touched on so far has really been about, okay, how do we just reduce what's going into the atmosphere? I mean, in my mind, this is the most important piece. It's much easier to stop putting things into the atmosphere than to try and undo the problem once it's already up there. But because we have stalled on this challenge for so long, there is this kind of burgeoning field of people trying to figure out this mix of, are there possibilities for drawing down more carbon than what nature is doing otherwise? And one way we think about it at Climate Interactive, we try and help people think of things in terms of systems, is but also like thinking about a bathtub. So you have a bathtub with the faucet, the tap, where all the water comes in. If you think about that as emissions, then the level of the bathtub could be the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And currently, the level of that tub is rising and it's overflowing. So what do you do to stop the tub from overflowing? Well, you have to do two things. One, you have to turn off that faucet, and you have to open the drain and figure out how to create that balance. And so one of the things that people are talking a lot about is, how do we create this balance between the removals coming out, which the planetary systems are already doing a ton around, and we got to make sure we're not continuing to undermine that. We're actually improving them so that our oceans, our forests can just do the job that they've done for a gazillion years and reduce our emissions. So captured over here, we have things like tree planting And then, as Michael was alluding to, different types of technological carbon removal. I think that big plant that you were mentioning, is it a type of direct air capture? Do you know, Michael? That is there in Scandinavia?
Yeah, it's pulling carbon out of the air. It's like sucking it in, pulling it out of carbon dioxide.
Yeah, so this is this technology called direct air capture, which is being piloted and doesn't really exist at a really large scale, but maybe, just maybe, it can be done in a way that is cost effective, and we can figure out how to do it, and it doesn't compromise any of the other goals we are working towards. So we could say, okay, well, what if we're really successful with direct air capture? What does that look like? And so just to replay that, we went from 2.3 down to 2.2. You see there's some direct air capture added to our scenario, and this blue line goes up slightly because we're drawing down more atmosphere, more from the atmosphere than we were putting in. So yeah, really fascinating stuff there. Also, a lot of zones there that I think we should just be careful about as well. The amount of land area that would be required for things like massive tree planting is just really huge. So in terms of betting our future on that, I think we should ask some really serious questions. But given the stakes of what we are up against with climate change, exploring these options, I don't think should be taken off the table either.
And I thought of something just, Samuel, further, the best example I've seen yet of a thorough integration of several of these concepts in a narrative was in a book called The Ministry for the Future. I'm going to drop a link in here just to Goodreads. But I read that a few months ago, and I was really inspired. It was horrifying and then inspiring. Because it's like we're going to suffer a bit, and there's going to be pushback from certain bad players out there, and we just have to overcome that. So that it actually is a great story, but it was full of examples of these different policies and strategies at work.
Yeah, that one's been on the top of my to read list. So I'm glad you mentioned that. Further bump it up on in terms of priority. Okay, at this point, we're at 2.2 degrees. We don't have that much time left. I would love to see us get at least below 2, hopefully towards 1.5. I'm going to go back to the poll everywhere and ask you guys just what have we left out? What is a policy that you would like to see that we haven't enacted yet, or one that you'd like to see us double down on, perhaps? So first vote's coming in for discouraging coal. Then someone suggesting, what about a carbon price or electrifying transport? We have done that. Check. Further reducing deforestation. I'll let a few more votes come in and see what bubbles to the top, and then maybe we can quickly add those in and see if we can get below 2 degrees. Okay, reducing deforestation and carbon price. Let's go there. Deforestation and carbon price, discouraging coal, come back into the picture. All right. Thanks for the live voting, everyone. Let's see. So, okay, deforestation. We touched on this some, particularly as it relates to food. We can stop some deforestation. And if we further just say, we need to get rid of all deforestation. What this is doing here is it's saying that by the year about 2040 or so, we hit no net deforestation. So that means that there's no more emissions coming from that land use emissions sector. And I'll change the graph here and we'll look at this a little more closely. So this graph is similar to what we were looking at previously, except for it's showing all the sources of greenhouse gases. And this thin green line here at the bottom is those sources from land use change. So those cases where we're moving from forests to, say, croplands, whatever else it may be. When we reduce deforestation, we can entirely eliminate those emissions by the year 2040. you can see that it didn't drop our temperature dramatically. We'd already done some action to reduce it. And some of the reason too why it isn't jumping temperature a lot is because you can see the proportion of total emissions that those land use emissions take up. Of course, one of the things to think about too is, of course, all the other benefits that come for why we might do a certain thing. When we reduce deforestation, that can help people's livelihoods who have depended on forests for ages and ages and ages, avoid things like illegal logging and help biodiversity. So benefits that come from that too. The last thing that was mentioned was carbon price. So what even is a carbon price? We hear a lot of discussion about it. The idea of a carbon price is that so many different power plants and energy producers burning fossil fuels, they're able to release carbon dioxide emissions into the atmosphere for free. And of course, we all depend on that atmosphere. Compromising that atmosphere is harming us all. And so therefore, what if we had some kind of system in which the polluters, those sources of carbon dioxide, had to pay to do that? And so we could set a carbon price, say $100 per every ton of carbon dioxide emitted into the atmosphere. And we'll test this and see what it will do. So we've already taken some action to limit fossil fuels. So keep in mind that this is on top of those other actions we've already taken. But what if we had a $100 per ton carbon price? I'll replay that change. And what you see is really that's further pushing our coal, oil, and gas down, making this dark gray wedge on the right, reflecting our energy carbon dioxide emissions, get that much smaller. Now we're at 1.9 degrees. Okay, well, that gets us below 2. Obviously, we want to push things further towards 1.5, but I'm going to stop here because I want to also give some time for questions, further discussion, connections back to the entertainment industry. So I'm going to share this scenario and I'll leave it to you all as a challenge. Create this scenario, push it all the way to 1.5, take out anything you didn't like, try adding other things back in. What we have done in this scenario is we stopped building new coal-fired power plants by the year 2025. We've subsidized renewable energy. We've put a tax on natural gas. We have a $100 per ton carbon price. Energy efficiency in the transport sector has gone up. We have electrified everything from our cars to our home heating, everything. And we've stopped deforestation as well as dramatically reduced emissions from our methane and nitrous oxide sector through food and waste. And then we've also experimented some with direct air capture and seen that take off. Yeah. Wow, this is quite a scenario, and I can think of them. You could take this and you could run with it in terms of going back to Samuel's point around narrative. That would be really fascinating.
Yeah, and on the carbon price, we right now the U.S. is pegged carbon in an interim price of $51 a ton. It's all over the place. So and it's really dangerous to just behave the way that we've been behaving and then just offset it, because you're not actually offsetting the real amount of carbon that's being created. There's all kinds of problems with it. Like if you're planting trees, those trees have to be protected for 20 years and not deforested or burned down or anything else. So be very careful when choosing that as part of your program. If you've got a production and you're reducing your carbon as much as possible, that's the first step, is reduce the carbon using all the methods available out there, reducing flights and a lot of other things that we discussed. But then when what's left, really vet that out and because there's some place the real cost of carbon, nobody knows what that actually is. Some say it's somewhere between 100 and 250, but you can buy carbon offsets for $6 to $10 a ton, and that's way below what it actually costs to remove carbon from the atmosphere.
Yeah, definitely. And another element of this too is what is the role that we haven't touched on yet? Is like, what's the role of the entertainment industry in advocating for policies enacted at the federal level? So that could also be a component to factor in. It's like, I think I saw that, Netflix was sending a letter to the federal government saying that they want to see a clean electricity payment program. I hope I got that right. But advocating for more policies for clean energy. What's the role of other groups in doing that?
I would love for us to continue this conversation for another hour or more and run through all the simulations. I'm so glad we got under 2 degrees Celsius. Thank you, Ellie, so much for that simulation. That was incredibly educational. And thank you, Michael, for all your comments. I do want to get to Adil's last question, but we also have a question for Adil from Samuel. What are some of Sierra Club's plans that we can support that discuss some of the issues mentioned in the NRoads simulator?
So the Sierra Club just voiced support for the Clean Energy Payment Program. They've been advocating heavily behind the reconciliation package, which I haven't been following as closely as our Fed policy team. But I mean, it's $3.5 trillion last I checked, and I think there are quite a few initiatives in there that would like move these sliders around. But like we've got a conservation program, but it's mostly US based. So like a lot of deforestation is in like tropical rainforests outside of the US. We also are building out like a building electrification program. So we're trying to encourage more cities and towns to ban new gas hookups and invest in heat pumps. And then we're also anti-nuclear, and we are very much in favor of renewables. Is storage also included in the renewables slider?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. As we've scaled up renewables, we've had to factor in kind of automatically all the storage that would be required.
Yeah. And then Sierra Club used to have a population program when talking about controlling our population wasn't as controversial. And I mean, I think that's a good thing, because like population control, that whole narrative, tragedy of the commons, etc., that whole theory was written by a guy who was like in favor of eugenics and like white supremacy and all that stuff.
Yep.
And then also in like bioenergy, I think there's a few proposals in like the Carolinas to develop these like wood pellet factories, and Sierra Club is heavily against those as well. So yeah, we're doing quite a bit of work on all these different factors. And my last question was, you all kind of touched on, but like when you show policymakers this model, what's their reaction? How do they think they can utilize it? Do they think they can like convince politicians and companies by using this?
Yeah, certainly we hope so, because one of the things that is unique, what you guys just saw, what you all just saw, is that by testing our theories, we can develop insights and about things in ways that we would have otherwise had to have read a gazillion papers on or whatever. And we have one of our colleagues has this refrain that he loves to say, which is that research shows that showing people research doesn't work. So therefore, we have to come up with other things. The entertainment industry knows this well. You come up with a way of getting people's hearts and minds galvanized around something, and that can really cultivate action. And so here we're doing it with a simulation model, but that's just one way. And for those who are kind of think in terms of graphs and the analytics, this can be a real light bulb moment in terms of thinking about what makes the most difference and where there might be gaps. We have shown it to some companies where they think about, their policies that maybe they have in their kind of corporate sustainability reports and their policies there. And by going through exercises like this, they can see, oh, wow, we weren't even thinking about, coal or whatever it may be. So we have some really interesting examples there. And I noticed too, we're at the top of the hour. So where are we with things? And maybe we should wrap it up. And I just want to thank you all for your great participation. This was wonderful. And take this scenario that I shared in the link and run with it. And if you're interested in sharing this with others, NRoads is free. We also provide trainings for people to become facilitators. We have a whole network of ambassadors that are trained in giving presentations similar to this. You can get involved and take it from there. We have, I think, an action guide that has some of those links included in it.
Yes, so thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Ellie and Michael, so much for hosting this.